Right, so is the real prospect of the mistake that was the creation of the State of Israel at the expense of the people of Palestine about to be repeated? Well, not only could it be repeated, but exactly the same nations would be the perpetrators of it again as well, namely the US and the UK. The idiotic white supremacist and racist colonial ideologies of more than 75 years ago are still present in the administrations of those nations today. And Israel itself is very much on board with the idea too. Because contrary to any notion that perhaps they are now so unhinged that Western powers need a replacement, this is actually all being done in Israel's benefit, because when is it not? As has been widely reported for some time, Donald Trump has a plan for Gaza, involving big gold statues of himself, casinos, hotels, the lot. Israel itself, especially the hard-right settler elements in government, are completely on board with this as well. All they need is somewhere to send all those Gazans that they absolutely don't want. Well, have they finally found somewhere, in which case, and who'd be mad enough to accept such a deal? Watch on and find out. Right, so history does have a cruel habit of repeating itself, even the most depraved and desperate acts that we all say never again about. This really ought to be one of them. The creation of the State of Israel, through the illegal seizure of land from indigenous people to dump a load of white Europeans in, as has been getting on for 80 years of disaster, not least for the Palestinian people. But it wasn't the first time British imperial interests did this, and so it appears it won't be the last either. Western powers, driven by geopolitical interests and colonial legacies, fantasies really, decide the fate of marginalised people without their consent. And so it seems this could be the fate for the Palestinian people of the Gaza Strip all over again. In 1948, the United States and the United Kingdom played pivotal roles in the creation of Israel, established at the expense of Palestinian displacement, dispossession, decades of suffering, as we've seen. It triggered regional war from the get-go, the Nakba, the Six-Day War, Israeli occupation of the Palestinian territories, an unmitigated disaster, which is why for as much as the West gleefully accepts the State of Israel and bends to its will over and over, a great many nations don't acknowledge Israeli statehood at all. Now, in 2025, those exact same powers, alongside Israel itself, appear to be orchestrating another catastrophic ethnic cleansing campaign, this time seeking to forcibly relocate Palestinians from Gaza to a new home, a second Israel, if you will. And the hoped-for target for all of this is Somaliland, the globally unrecognised breakaway state on the Horn of Africa, having split away from Somalia in 1991. This plan bears disturbing echoes of the Nazi-proposed Madagascar plan, which of course sought to deport European Jews to the then French colony off the coast of East Africa as a solution to the so-called Jewish question. The bitter irony is that Israel, a state born in part at least from the trauma of that same Jewish persecution, is now facilitating the mass expulsion of Palestinians, a repeating of history, echoing the very crimes once inflicted upon their forefathers that they get so sensitive about as well. Meanwhile, the US and UK, despite their professed commitments to human rights, are complicit in what could become one of the largest forced displacements in modern history, and an event that many of us would have never imagined being repeated, consigned to the history books surely, as such a move should have been. Since the beginning of Israel's brutal assault on Gaza following the events of October 7th, but most notably since Donald Trump floated support for such an idea, Israeli officials have openly discussed expulsion of Palestinians from the Strip. Israel even has a government department devoted to this now. It has been reported recently that aside from US attempts to find a suitable location to enact Trump's plan for Gaza, that Benjamin Netanyahu had ordered Mossad to seek African and Asian countries willing to accept forcibly displaced Gazans. This had not been going well. I've done a few videos on it. Nobody wanted to be party to war crimes the US and Israel would be guilty of. We're advocating for here forced displacement of a population very much meeting the definition of genocide, and anyone aiding in that is a criminal too, of course. And this also aligns with earlier statements by far-right Israeli ministers advocating for the voluntary migration, as they put it, of Palestinians, which was just a blatant euphemism for ethnic cleansing. In this modern age, all of this is chillingly reminiscent of the 20th century European colonialist mindset, isn't it? When indigenous populations resist occupation, you simply remove them. Israel is a state founded in part due to the forced displacement of Jews from Europe, and yet they now, despite their history, is replicating that same violence against Palestinians. But this really has nothing to do with Judaism. It has everything to do with Zionism. This is an ideological war crime. It has nothing to do with faith or religion. And so this brings us to Somaliland, potentially Israel 2.0. The US, under Donald Trump's insanity, has reportedly explored formally recognising Somaliland. That is the carrot being dangled before them. It is currently an unrecognised statelet. No nation on earth actually recognises Somaliland currently. Not even the UN does. In exchange for accepting Palestinians' ethnically cleansing from Gaza, though, perhaps that might change. And this move would actually serve multiple purposes for the US. It gets rid of the Gazan people from Gaza, giving either Trump or Israel free rein to take over wholesale. It would allow the US to establish a new military presence, a new military foothold near the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. And it would serve to counter growing Chinese influence in the area, China having a port now in the neighbouring state of Djibouti, which welcomes Iranian shipping, amongst others, the US simply cannot cope with. The UK, though not formally recognising Somaliland either, has maintained strong economic and political ties due to its colonial history in the region as well, because just like Palestine was carved up by the UK to create Israel out of British colonialism, Somaliland remains significantly tied to UK interests as well. British businesses have invested heavily in Somaliland's ports and infrastructure, mirroring pre-1948 British interests in Palestine. Hence the UK's role in possibly facilitating a repeat of some seriously abhorrent history of our own. Is it really all that simple, though? Is it all a done deal? Well, Somaliland declared independence from Somalia in 1991 after a brutal civil war, which is still largely going on. All the borders there are thoroughly disputed, though it functions still as a de facto state in its own right now, with its own government, own currency, own security forces. No UN member recognises it. As a result, its economy is the fourth lowest in terms of GDP on the planet. In part, that is due to that lack of recognition, because it can't easily trade its own currency without official recognition. It relies heavily on remittances and trade through the port of Berbera, Somaliland's main trade being in livestock, ironically across the rest of the Middle East, though. There are significant parallels with pre-1948 Palestine here, though. Again, there is that British colonial legacy. Just as Britain controlled Palestine under a League of Nations mandate, it governed Somaliland as a protectorate until 1960. Somaliland is also strategically valuable, as aforementioned, and where Palestinians had to make way for European Jews, so now may Somalilanders have to make way for Gazans. So for the people of Gaza, should they be sent there, nothing is going to dramatically change for the better for them. Somaliland, the circumstances it's under, warfare still going on, its borders disputed, not recognised, it is not a safe haven. Political repression goes on there. Clan-based discrimination, crackdowns on dissent suggest that Palestinians sent there could face further persecution. Moreover, the region lacks the infrastructure to support a sudden influx of refugees, meaning Gazans could be confined to camps. Oh dear, where have we heard that one before? Though that in itself echoes the very conditions they are kept in Gaza, of course, exchanging one open-air prison for another. Where Somaliland might be a strategic, important location, though, it is also a vulnerable one. For example, should the US establish a base in Somaliland, the port of Berbera, as it is talking about, it would be a direct challenge to the Chinese presence in neighbouring Djibouti, but it would only serve, therefore, is only serving to destabilise the area even more around the Gulf of Aden and the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, even more than it already is. And that's not taking into account the Houthis of Yemen blockading shipping in that area as well. And of course the Houthis themselves are also a significant factor here. Whilst having a US base so close to Yemen might be thought of as strategically advantageous to the US, especially if they're going to keep attacking Yemen, it also paints a god almighty target on Somaliland for the Houthis. There are, as an example, less than 300 nautical miles between the US's often hit Yemeni target, the port of Hadida, and the Somaliland port of Berbera, where the US want to put a military base. And there then comes the risk that the Gazan people could be used as a human shield by the US or Somaliland in order to shield themselves from Houthi attacks, which are very much inside their range. And Somaliland has nothing like the air defences or any defence to speak of in the same way that Israel does, as an example. So the biggest question, therefore, is, will Somaliland sell out in exchange for state recognition and the boost to its economy that would come with that? Or is this a price that will be too high for them to be prepared to pay? Somaliland's leaders may see US recognition as a path to legitimacy, but in doing so they risk becoming a complete pawn of US and Israeli interest when they sit too uncomfortably close to Middle Eastern nations they rely on for trade themselves already, as things stand. It would make them pariahs like Israel, to become Israel 2.0. So there would have to be massive economic incentives provided for them to agree to this, surely, for them to agree to such a repugnant and morally bankrupt plan that will paint a target on them. Yet it cannot be ignored that the central plank of Somaliland's President Abdirahman Mohamed Abdullahi is international state recognition. And this is being dangled there in front of him in exchange for a US base in Berbera. And should US interests take over the state, as effectively would happen, the state recognised then as it would presumably be, it would be completely and utterly reliant on Western protections from its neighbours, exactly like Israel is today. We're at a point with this story where instead of saying never again, Western powers are looking at doing it again in relation to forcible displacement of entire populations. The US and UK, which claim to uphold human rights, are already facilitating genocide in their support for Israel, their arming of Israel, their surveillance flights for Israel, but this would make them party to ethnic cleansing as well. Their support for this plan exposes a hypocrisy of their foreign policy, never again, because it applies only to certain victims and never to Palestinians. Meanwhile, speaking of the Houthis, it seems they might have been able to cripple the USS Harry S. Truman, the US's flagship in the Red Sea, albeit temporarily, in another escalation of their ability to take on the most powerful nation in the world's navy without actually possessing a navy of their own. Another source of hilarity and embarrassment for the Trump regime in the Middle East, as their attempts to forcibly stop the Houthis striking both those US assets and Israel in solidarity with the people of Gaza fails time and again. Get all the details of that story in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new content dropping daily, as well as helping to support the channel at the same time, which is very much appreciated, holding power to account for ordinary working class people. And I will hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers folks.